Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm back with another card using the My Monthly Hero card kit. I'm going to be creating another scene here. And I'm stamping on a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock with blackout ink by Ink on 3. And I'm starting off with my trees here, and I'm going to be stamping one on either side to start. And then I will mask those out with Simon Says stamp masking paper. Now these masks are used. They took quite a while to cut out, so I wasn't going to try to recut them if I didn't have to. So I was being a little lazy here, and I didn't even cut the whole thing. I just cut off the one side that I would actually need. I'm masking this one off to the right just because I'm going to be doing ink blending, but the one off to the left, I'm going to be stamping another tree behind it to make the wooded area or the forest or whatever this is or whatever you want to call it a little bit more full. So I inked up my stamp again and positioned that in the back of that first tree. And then I will go ahead and mask that out as well. Again, I only cut out just the one side. Now you can see my one part of my tree didn't totally stamp there, but we'll go back in and fix that later. Some of these masks, when you reuse masks, they kind of curl up a little bit, so they're a little bit harder to line up. But eventually, once I did get that lined up, I went ahead and stamped the little deer that is also part of the stamp set right there in the center. I want this to appear like an opening or a path within the woods. I stamped him right there in the middle, like I said, and masked him out as well. And then I'll stamp two of the little birds that are in the stamp set. I was thinking two turtle doves. I don't even know if turtle doves are a real thing, but we're going to call them doves. So I stamped those above the deer and masked those out with that same masking paper, and we'll move on to the ink blending. Now I kept the ink blending pretty simple. I didn't really do much shading at all, really. I'm going to start off with the little path, I guess, that's in the woods, and I wanted to make this look like it was snow. So I'm going to start off with the shaded lilac, and this is regular distress ink because I knew I might do some coloring over it. So it's best to use regular distress ink rather than the oxides. And I'm just bringing that in from either side of the little trees. I'll bring in my tumbled glass and blend that shaded lilac out right there to the center of that little path. So just a little bit of that purplish color is showing on either side. I'm going in with a very, very light hand. These are super light colors anyway, but I don't want to get those marks from the foam pad. So I'm going in with a very, very light hand and tapping off my ink blending tool on that scratch paper. Next, I'll go in with the sky. I'm using Salty Ocean, and I'm just starting off from the top, making that the darkest and kind of fading that out to white. Here I noticed that I didn't cut my mask quite as far as I probably should have, so I just peeled that up. I'm going in with a very, very, very light hand here, especially towards the bottom, and I planned on coloring these trees pretty dark, so I knew that I'd be able to cover up any distress ink that got on top of it anyway. Now, in order to kind of differentiate between the sky and the ground, I ended up taking a piece of Eclipse masking paper and just cutting that down. I didn't use my paper trimmer or anything like that to make sure it was straight. I just kind of cut that and placed that down on the top to mask out the bottom part of the snow or the opening within the woods. Next, I brought back in that shaded lilac and the tumbled glass just to add a little bit of shadowing on the top part there, just to, like I said, differentiate between that and the sky. I went a little bit too heavy-handed. I wish I would have went a little bit lighter, but you can see most of my ink is actually on the masking paper and not on the card panel itself. I had that white area from the sky and it was just a little bit too white, so I did go back in with my Salty Ocean and just added another layer of that before we moved on to the coloring. When the Distress ink is still wet, even though this is not the oxides, it does still stay wet longer than regular ink. You want to make sure that you're pretty careful when you're removing your masks. A lot of times the masks can tear, especially if you're using, like Simon says, stamp masking paper that is a little bit more tacky than most. These are used masks, so they're not really all that tacky to begin with. But once I had all of my masks removed, we'll move on to the coloring. We're going to start off with the deer first, and you can see he's a little blue because I had a little bit of a white outline, and I just went over with my ink blending tool without re-inking it just to fill in that area. I'm starting off with my lightest color. This is the E30, and just mapping out my darkest areas, which will be on either side of his leg, as well as the legs that are kind of behind the others. On the bottom where his little belly is, underneath his chin and down his chest, I guess it would be, and a little bit behind his ears. We'll go in with the E37, which is the darkest color, and just adding a little tiny bit here, just barely touching the paper. Then we'll move on to our darkest midtone. This is the E33, just kind of blending that E37 out a little bit, and also adding a few more shadows that I didn't necessarily need to be as dark, so I didn't bother to put the E37 there. But you can still create more shadows with your darkest midtone. Next, we'll move on to the lightest midtone. This is the E37, and just extending that this is the E31, I lied. And extending that E33 out a little bit further, just leaving small little areas there for the highlight color. And we'll move on back down to the E30 and blend all those areas out. Now, this is a baby deer because he still has spots. So I don't want them to be bright white. So I'm gonna take my colorless blender and kind of just dot those in those areas to kind of take away some of that color, but not leave it completely white. For the little birds, I wanted these to be white, so I'm just gonna be adding a little bit of shading here, starting with my C3 and just adding a little bit of shadow behind his wings and underneath his little body. Then I'll go on to the I can't speak today, the C1, and flicking that out a little bit. And in order to get rid of those little flick lines from the C1, I'm going to quickly go over the entire area with my colorless blender. Next, we'll move on to the trees. I will not show you the coloring for all three of the trees. First, I am going to start with my E59, and I'm just going to be coloring the trunk of the tree or the bark of the tree, strictly for placement, just so I can kind of tell what is what before I start the coloring of the branches themselves. And I colored these in solid. I didn't bother to do any shading. These are really tiny areas, and they're not going to be the main focus of the tree anyway. And we'll start with this first tree all the way off to the left. I'm going to be using my YG90 markers, and I'm going to go right in with my darkest color because I don't want these to be perfectly blended. I am concentrating my darkest area being in the center towards the trunk of the tree, and I am putting little flicks here and there, especially when there's one branch lying over or under another, but I'm pretty much doing this randomly. I don't want these to be overly blended because I want to see the different greens within the tree. I'm not also worried about too much shading. I am putting some shading where branches are clearly lying underneath another, but there are some areas that I didn't bother to fill in. These are so intricate that once you have all of your coloring done, nobody is going to be able to really see if your shading was done perfectly. Nobody's even going to take a look that hard to find any mistakes. Once I had my YG99 down, I moved on to my YG97, and I'm pretty much just going in those same areas that I had the YG99 and extending those lines out or those flicks out a little bit further. Again, not doing too much blending here. I'm not really working at it too much. I'm kind of just plopping down the color here and there. Once my YG97 was down, we'll move on to the YG95. Pretty much doing the same thing, going over those same areas. There are a few gaps within the branches that are actually not branches, if you take a look at the stamp, but being these are kind of laying right on top of one another, I colored those in solid with one of my lightest colors, whether it would be the YG95 or YG93, just to make them appear that they are part of the tree. Next, I am going to cover up the entire area with my YG93, and you'll notice that I'm not doing any flicking here. I'm pretty much just covering it up. I'm not over blending. I'm going over it fairly quickly because I want those different shades of green to clearly show. Once I had this tree colored, I did color the other two trees the same exact way. I did take a Copics safe pen to kind of draw in those branches that we lost when I didn't stamp correctly before I did my coloring. Once the trees were colored, I took my white gel pen and just added a few little lines, some thicker than others. Sometimes I scribbled it down, sometimes I just put a straight line, and I'm pretty much concentrating on the top of the branches because this is where the snow would be kind of piled onto the tree. It would be on top of the branches. And if you're using your gel pen a lot, you know, you're not just adding a few little highlights here and there. So if you find that it's not flowing as it should, just rub it on the tip of your finger and kind of warm up the tip of the pen, and you'll notice that you'll get better results. And once again, I did do the same thing to all three of the trees. I will not bore you with the rest of it. Once all my gel pen was down or my snow was down, I did add a few little shadows underneath the deer himself. I am going to go in with my B93 and just put a few little lines underneath his little feet, extend that out with my B91, which was still significantly darker than the snow itself. So I did take my colorless blender just to quickly go over that to lighten that area up just a bit. Fixed up any other areas with my white gel pen, kind of filled in a little bit of those missing areas with that gel pen to create a little bit more snow there in the center of the trees. Then I will cut down my panel just a little bit on the top and a teeny tiny bit on either side. I just don't like to see that distress ink all kind of piled up on the sides. Next, I took my sentiment that is also part of that stamp set, and I'm stamping this with the VersaFine ink right there in the center on the top of the card where my little sky is. And I wanted to add sparkle, of course, to the card, and I ended up going crazy with it. This is a Nuvo glitter pen or glimmer pen, and I'm covering up all three trees. And then I decided that I wanted my snow itself to be a little bit sparkly as well. So I went over the entire area of where that deer is standing, just trying to avoid putting glitter on the deer or on the little birds. Next, I took Fun Foam and I wanted to pop this up onto an A2 size card base. And I'm taking really strong double-sided tape here to adhere this to one side of my foam tape. Then I'll stick that down to the back of my card panel, place another layer of the double-sided adhesive, and then stick that down to my card base itself. I did stick this on just a little bit crooked, but hopefully it won't be too noticeable. But that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.